Namaskar. Hearty welcome to BIMSTEC Literature Festival being organized by Sahitya Academy and Foundation of SARC Writers and Literature, that is POSPOL. And hearty welcome to this 12th session that is dedicated to paper presentation. And each one of them is been allotted with 15 minutes. And this session is going to be chaired by Kunzang Chodenji from Bhutan. And in this session, we have 4 papers. One is from Niyaz Zamanji from Bangladesh, followed by Lakshmi Khannan from India, and then Sumanasriji Thero from Sri Lanka, and then Kunzang Chodenji from Bhutan will present their papers. Now may I request Namaskar ji, Ajit Kaur ma'am, for your commitment and dedication. And now may I request the chair of this today's session, 12th session, Kunzang Chodenji, to kindly take over the session.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. It's always very happy to be among the BIMSTEC SARC countries, and thank you very much, Ajit ji, for allowing us to have this kind of a forum, even in difficult times. And I think there are just 2 of us who are going to be reading papers present just now. And how shall we do? Mr. Suresh Babu, you will keep the time. 15 minutes is each person. So you'll be the timekeeper also. And I think we can begin with your permission, Ajit Kaur ji, that we will start the paper of Niyaz Zamanji from Bangladesh. Hello, please start. I think we are supposed to introduce ourselves and then read our papers or tell about what we've written for the next 15 minutes. Thank you so much.
Namaskar, Assalamu alaikum, good afternoon, and Sat Sri Akal. Thank you so much, Ajit Kaur ji, for holding on to FOSWAL and organizing this wonderful conference. I will read 15 minutes. I will not read in detail. I will take just 15 minutes. I am an academic. I've actually retired, but I still teach a little bit. I'm also a writer and translator. Today, I will talk about the novels of Qazi Nazrul Islam, very briefly. Qazi Nazrul Islam, 1899 to 1976, is well known as a poet and lyricist. However, he began his writing career with fiction. His first publication was a short story in 1919. He wrote a total of 18 short stories collected in 3 anthologies, and 1 short story was discovered later, and it was included in a collection of stories published by Nazrul Institute, Dhaka. Nazrul also wrote 3 novels, Bandhon Hara, in English Unfettered, Mrityu Khudha, Deathly Hunger or Hunger for Death, and Kuhelika, The Enigma, which has been translated into English as The Revolutionary. Unlike Rabindranath Tagore's novels, which have been discussed in academia and made into very popular films, Nazrul's novels have more or less been neglected. But his novels are very important because, as I said, he began with fiction, but they're also important because they complement his poems, and they also throw a light on his times, the conditions, the political situation, as well as the social conditions. Now, his first novel was Bandhonhara, and it is in letters. Perhaps it was the first novel in letters to be published in India. The novel contains 18 letters. 15 of them are written by the protagonist Nuru, and the others by his friends and members of his family. The story is about Nuru's love for two women and their love for him, Sophie and Mahbuba. But Nuru is a free spirit, and he does not want to get tied down. So he joins the British Indian Army and is posted to Karachi. And the letters show his show the condition of Indian soldiers in the British Indian Army in the 1920s. But the letters also depict the story of what happens to the two women whom he left behind. Both of them are married off. One of them falls very ill after a marriage. The other one is married to a rich man who dies, leaving her a very rich widow. Now, what is interesting about this novel is not just the romantic story, but the insight that the novelist provides into the lives of characters. All the women characters except one are Muslim. And these women show us what life is like in the Andar Mahal. Life is like in Parda. And they explain that, you know, women also have feelings, they have desires, they fall in love. And most important, they do not want to be locked up, in dark rooms. Are we not human beings? One of the characters says. We are human beings. We have feelings, and we possess a soul. So this novel, through the women characters, was saying something similar, demanding similar rights for women that Rokia Sakawat Hussain was demanding in her essays. The other novel I want to talk about is Mrityu Khuda. There is like a pun in that word, which means both deathly hunger or hunger for death. And I have translated it into English and titled it Love and Death in Krishna Nagar. All three of Nazrul's novels, interestingly, have a love triangle. But the love triangle is really not the most important part of the novels. What is important is the message that Nazrul wants to give us. So in Mrityu Khuda, Nazrul, this is based in Krishna Nagar, which was very politically active at the time. And Nazrul had gone to Krishna Nagar and he had been appalled seeing the poverty in that place. And the novel opens a window into the situation of men and women, of Hindus, Muslims, and Christians who are struggling in order to survive. Nazrul's first novel had as its protagonist a soldier, but a very rebellious soldier. This novel, as its protagonist, has Ansar, a Bolshevik, who tries to promote the idea of socialism, tries to promote the idea that all workers should unite and be free. But what is important in this book, I think, are two things. One is that his name is Ansar. He was in love with a woman who was married off to the man her father chose. But this novel is remarkable, I think, for Nazrul's sort of very open portrayal of a woman's desire for love. The character Ruby goes to join this man, her lover, in prison. He is dying of tuberculosis, but she gives in to, they both sleep together. And she said, I know that this is going to cause him to get worse and die. I will also get tuberculosis, but my love for him is much more. The other important character is a woman called Mejobo. She is not given a name. She is the second sister-in-law, and she becomes a Christian because it is by becoming a Christian that she can get education. But she finds at the end that she has to become a Muslim once again if she wants to. Her son has died, her young son has died, and she wants to carry out the 40-day ritual for him, but she's not allowed to do so if she is Christian. So she reconverts, and then she promises herself that though her son is dead, she will look after other children. She will start a school. So in this novel, Nazrul is trying to say that there are two ways in which the situation of human beings can become better. One is by educating children, by educating women, by educating children. And the other is by making workers, coolies, laborers aware of their rights. My last novel, the last novel I will talk about is Kuhelika, which was like the other novels, serialized and published in 1931. Kuhelika means enigma. And most people who talk about it as either a romantic novel or the novel of a revolutionary. And it is a remarkable novel because in the 1930s, there were no Muslim revolutionaries in Bengal. And Nazrul makes it very clear that if India wants independence, then Muslims and Hindus, people of different religions, have to join together. And Kabir Chaudhry, who first translated the book, tells us that it's a political novel and the novel of a revolutionary, and that it is important as a novel of a revolutionary. But what Kabir Chaudhry does not discuss is the fact that this revolutionary is a unique individual. He is an illegitimate child, the child of a very rich father and a dancing girl. And when he learns, his background, he is so horrified that it completely changes his entire outlook towards life. And he becomes a very complicated person. On one hand, he's a very friendly person, but on the other hand, he has this complex. And his best friend takes him to his village where, this man's name is Jahangir, I should say that, the protagonist Jahangir, goes to his friend's village. His friend introduces him to the family, introduces him to his sister. And what Jahangir does is, it's not a romantic story. What Jahangir does is he rapes this girl. Now, no one I know has discussed this, because somehow, how can Nazrul Islam be talking about rape in his novel? So this has been eluded completely. Someone else, a younger person who wrote a review of this novel, talked about the ending and said how romantic it is that Jahangir is together with this Hindu girl. But what she did not focus on is that Jahangir had actually raped someone, and he was trying to seduce this other girl. And it was this girl who said, no, we are revolutionaries. We have been sent on a mission and we cannot give in to our feelings for each other. At the end, they are trying to carry out a mission. They fail. His fellow female revolutionary manages to escape, but Jahangir is arrested and he is tried and he will be sent to the Andaman Islands, which means he is never going to come back. And what he does as to expiate his sin against his friend's sister, he gives half his wealth to the girl whom he raped and half his wealth to his fellow revolutionary. I have, with 15 minutes, it's very difficult to go into great detail, but I just want to give you all a sort of like a taste of Nazrul's novels and to suggest and to stress that Nazrul's fiction should be read much more and read much more carefully than it has so far been done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Niyaz Zaman. That was really intriguing, and you have really given us a taste of the mind and how the mind of this great novelist Nazrul worked. And we have learned so much, although within the 15 minutes, that's just too short for, a very deep insight into all the three novels that you've talked about. I think with your very eloquent and articulate speech, with knowing exactly what to say, I think we got a very good insight into the lives and times, the political, the religious issues of the time that Mr. Nasru, the novelist Nasur, is talking about. And now it has all been translated into different languages, it seems. He wrote in Bangla.
He wrote in Bangla. He wrote in Bangla. All three novels have been translated. The first one was translated by a group of 8 persons. The second novel, Mittu Khuda, I translated it myself.
Oh, wonderful.
And the last novel, Puhilika, has been co-translated by another academic who at present lives in Australia. So all three novels have been translated.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So you've really whetted our appetite to go and look into these translations and read the books as the author Nasrul intended. Now, how many other people are there, Mr.
I think they're yet to join the paper presenters from India as well as Sri Lanka. I think since they have not yet joined, I think you may carry on. You can present your paper.
Okay, thank you very much. While Dr. Niyaz Zaman talked about very specific novels, I have taken the liberty to talk in very general about the situation of literature in Bhutan. And under the title that was given to us, Our Literature, Ancient and Contemporary, I have taken the liberty to subtitle my presentation as Traditional Religious Literature and Modern Secular Literature in the case of Bhutan. And I would like again to give you recognition for this presentation. As we talked, you mentioned translation and translation work, but translators were there since the 8th century, and we have been impacted. Our literature has been impacted by one of the great translators from Bangla, a Buddhist monk by the name of Santa Rasi Sita. He was one of the big translators to Tibet and started the translation already in the 8th century. So mine is a very general, I'm not going aspect of literature. I'm just going to give you the situation of literature as we know it here in Bhutan. Okay, so I will read from my paper. Bhutan has a rich literary tradition and a significant collection of traditional religious literature. The history of Bhutan's literature most probably began after the first Buddhist activities following the introduction of Buddhism in the country in the 7th century. Today, we recognize 2 temples that were built in Bhutan, one in central Bhutan, where I come from, and one in western Bhutan, who were supposed to be the distinctive symbols of the beginning of Buddhism here. But although Buddhism had reached the country, it failed to take a stronghold. And it was much later, a century later, that Buddhism actually began to spread. Now, prior to this date, Bhutan was basically an oral society without indications of the existence of a literary culture, no written literature. Although I think most of us know that wherever the civilizations were, there was always a very strong oral literature. And Bhutan had also a very diverse, vibrant oral literature, which is even very important for us to date. But in this paper, I will not be talking about the oral the Bhutanese religious literature, again, originated in Tibet. And of course, the source of this literature came from India. And the literature was closely related to the religion, Buddhism, and true introduction of Buddhism and the spread of Buddhism in Tibet began when the 37th king of Tibet, whose name is Tizung Ditsin, invited Padmasambhava, who was a great saint and a mystic from the Swat Valley in present-day Pakistan. He was at that time in Nalanda, and along with him came this Bengali monk, Buddhist monk, by the name Santa Ratista. They came to Tibet, and they are responsible for having built the first iconic Tibetan temples, Buddhist temples in central Tibet. Even today, it exists after many renovations. The construction of the temple was completed in 779 AD, and after the construction of the temple, the projects of translating Buddhism from Indian sources began. And this was the beginning of the literature in Bhutan. I just quote a Bhutanese, well-known Bhutanese scholar who is a practitioner as well as an author by the name Karma Pinso. I think Madam Ajit Kaur knows him. He writes in his history book that, I quote, "It is a well-known historical fact that a massive and systematic translation of the Buddhist literature from Indic and Chinese sources took place during the late 8th century, involving several dozens of Tibetan translators and Tibetan translators. The bulk of the Buddhist literature in Tibetan, codified later in the canons called Kanjur and Tenjur, was translated in the 8th and the first half of the 9th centuries. So with this translation work, the written literature of the Buddhist tradition started. And as Buddhism spread in Tibet, it also reached Bhutan concurrently and gradually spread throughout the country, and the written works began to accumulate. And today we have a significant corpus of literature consisting of printed texts and xylographic manuscripts. Today, Bhutan's collection of literary treasures constitutes a considerable part of our country's cultural heritage. However, most of the literature consists of religious texts which dealt with philosophy, autobiographies, biographies of saints and religious personalities, commentaries, rituals, and prayers. There were also some works on subjects that were not entirely religious, but they dealt with subjects that were quite specialized. And these were mainly astrology, grammar, poetry, medicine, texts for divination and healing. And they formed a corpus of literature, but the irony was it was not accessible to the illiterate population who thrived on oral traditions. And these were in the hands of the monks and the elite. And the literature was there in the country, but inaccessible to the population. And because the written word was considered religious, It was also, whatever literature came was also associated with the religious world, and books and manuscripts came to be seen as sacred in themselves. So even the actual letters, the alphabets, were deemed to be sacred. So that resulted in these texts, mainly manuscripts, was rendered in loose folios. It was not bound as books. So they were rendered in loose folios and bound in a way that was very, very special. The folios were put together, then they were bound in cloth. In our language, we say dressed in cloth. We would give them the best clothes. And then they were put between two slabs, wooden planks, and kept away securely and kept in the temples. So they were in the possession of the clergy and not in the homes of the people who couldn't read. Okay, and these books were kept in the altars with the statues of Buddha, Bodhisattvas, saints, teachers, and masters, and worshipped. They were not accessible for every day. In some temples, the most prominent literature representations was what I talked about, the Kanjur and the Tanjur, which have 108 volumes, and each volume weighs about 7 kilos. It's a lot of books that you could read by your bed, keep on your bedside and read. And they were the ones that were translated by the early translators, the original sutras and the tantras, just translated from Indian sources. What does Kanjur mean? Kanjur means literally the translated sacred words or precepts of the Buddhists. And Tanjur, again 108 volumes, were the translated commentaries, the literature from India that come into Bhutan. And so but again, they were out. This culture of treating texts themselves as sacred objects, which were to be kept beyond the reach of the general public, limited the accessibility of the general public to the rich literary sources of the country. So the literature was removed from the public. This was not extraordinary, I think. I don't know, maybe some other people think differently. Because in the past, most civilizations were oral societies and illiterate, because literacy was confined to the clergy and few of the elite. Religion, literacy, and education were being seen as synonymous. So if you wanted to get literate, you had to join the religious world, in other words. And it was mainly the monks. Now you talked about how women had a desire, they had a feeling. This was never considered. It was just kept away, and especially the women had absolutely no access to these because these were male domain. Okay? Those who desired to get literate and educated had to join the monastery or seek a religious teacher. And that was difficult. So the literature was not available to the people at all. Although formal religious education was in theory accessible to all, it was in truth accessible to only a few people of the country. The limited literacy created a system in which the people who could read and write and were literate became the creators of knowledge, literary knowledge, literature, and everything. And they only also became the custodians. And the other people could avail the services of these people to read for them. So literature was something really that was very special, that you could invite somebody to read for you. And the texts were read when people felt the need to have some prayers, pujas, you would say, to read to them. And for these occasions, you had to borrow these books from the temples. And of course, some families had their own collection, so they could read from them. So in fact, the people who could read and write were charged with the responsibility of reading the text and explaining their text to the general public, and thereby ensure the people's well-being in this lifetime, and to inform them and prepare them for the afterlife, which is very, very important. So reading texts on behalf of the people to accumulate merit, to have the spiritual well-being in their life and prepare them for after death. Okay. So what I've said so far really points out to the fact there was a flourishing religious literary tradition, which was exclusive. But maybe we could also include what we call documents called kashos, which were edicts issued from the clergy and later on the royal courts, and other correspondences which have been stored and documented and archived. And they also could be included among the literature of Bhutan because they give very useful historical information about the political, the social events or the situations in the country. Now, religious literature was limited, as I said. Modern education for Bhutan began only in the 1960s. So that was the first time when the masses had an access to the literature. But that took a while because there were no schools, modern schools in Bhutan. And it was only after 1952 that the third king of Bhutan, he said children should be educated. Both boys and girls should be educated. And for the first time, modern secular educational systems of education institutes became available. And also groups of children, both boys and girls, were sent to study in India. And they went to study in the schools that were run by Catholic Christian missionaries, Anglo-Indian schools. And while the schools were the infrastructure for the schools were being prepared. So in these modern schools, the medium of education was in English, and they learned the local languages that were available. So it was Bangla, Nepali, Hindi, all these languages they were also exposed to. And, in the last 50 years, Bhutanese students have not only exposed the literature of the countries which hosted them, but they were also exposed to the literature and the writing works of the other countries. And this also greatly influenced their thought and the idiom, the way they wrote. While there was appreciation and an interest in the literature of other countries, it has taken a long time for Bhutan to really establish itself as having a contemporary literature. We are still struggling. I think it was only in the 1990s that some Bhutanese people who were educated outside began to consider writing, not only academic papers and not only scholarly papers, but creative writing and other genres of literature, poetry, and all only in the 1990s. So we're very new to this scene of creating contemporary literature. Within the last 20, 30 years, some works have been published that are non-religious, non-academic, non-official documents, and Bhutanese write both in English as well as in the official language, which is called Dzongkha. But we are still at the stage when, the growth is very cautious and very tenuous. We are still, people have written in poetry, in prose form, but we are still very, very uncertain and not confident at all. There are some publications to date that have been recognized, but we don't have a huge body of contemporary literature. Because as I said, we have yet to find our voices. We have yet to learn the general principles and procedures for conventional book publishing. So we are most of a rich literary culture, contemporary literature culture. And it has even been said by some that, and I'm inclined to agree with that Bhutan came straight from an oral tradition, skipped the literary tradition, and went right to the visual and we are doing much better. The young people are doing much better in the visual aspects, and the visual storytelling has become very important, very vibrant in Bhutan. And Bhutanese have taken to the visual platform with more ease. You know, the written, literary, conventional is not so established, but the film industry is doing very well. Other forms of social media and people writing on social media is very vibrant. And in the last recent years, you may have even heard that Bhutanese film industry has done so well that we had even a representation in the Oscars. Okay, so I'll stop here because there's nothing much to say. Thank you very much for giving me your time. Thank you, Ajit ji. You have seen me from my, flauntering times about 15, 20 years ago. And now I've grown old with you. And I am 22 years ago. So this has been a remarkable relationship, a remarkable forum for me to appreciate what you have done for me. And my first novel, which was published in India in 2005, was thanks to you giving me the forum. And then a publisher came and said, well, we'll publish. So it's thanks to you that you put me on my feet on the ground as a writer. Thank you very much, and I am indebted to you forever. Thank you.
Kulzang Chodanji, after listening to your paper presentation, I thought of asking at least 2 to 3 questions because I also belongs to the same literary fraternity.
Okay.
So may I be permitted to ask?
Of course.
Fine. My first question goes to you as because you said that the visual art has increased leaps and bounds.
Mm-hmm.
And you said still there is no much as such creation as such literature
Mm-hmm.
concentrated on the society. You're still saying that we are somehow from oral traditions to we have just a few years back we have converted into a written form.
Yes.
And you also said that the domination of religious texts than the normal sociological aspect. Do you think that still is there any restriction for book publication, or is there any restriction about sociological aspects to be written in form of literature?
Very good questions. It's just that we are still in the nurturing stage. We're still learning, because like for my, my parents and parents of, we came from a home where there were hardly any books except literary books, except religious literature. And for us, it's a very new platform for us to be able to write. There's no restriction. In fact, there are quite a few books that have been published, but the problem is that because we are quite small, quite special, many books are self-published. Self-published, which does not give the critical acclaim, the class, or the standard of real publishing. And young people who are very enthused by literature and stories from other countries have published, but we still don't know how we should go about the whole process. Is to get yourself published. It's a whole process. I was just lucky, as I said, I came to the Foswell SARC festival, and there I just met a publisher, and she said there's something that you could do. So you have to be very lucky to be at a forum like this. There is no restriction. People like myself who are still very, we do everything by hand and all. We still hope that some of the young people will write, have the courage to write, but not only that, be open to critique. We are a small society. So we are also very careful what we write because you don't want to hurt your neighbor or, my grandmother or, so we are very careful about that. Because,
My intention is to ask you that because after all, literature is nothing but a depiction of the society. Because literature is somewhere other does represents the society.
Exactly. And that is very interesting because we come from an oral tradition and we have at the back of our heritage so many oral stories and sayings and oral histories. Many of the young people who have written their stories are based in the oral society.
That's
and
correct.
Many of them documented folk tales because they're very comfortable with that, and that's what they knew. So that's what it is. Does it answer your question, Dr.?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you very
Thank you
much.
so much, Kunzang Chodenji, for kindly answering my questions.
Thank you.
So with this 12th session of this BIMSTEC Literature Festival has come to end. I sincerely thank both the chair of today's this 12th session, Dr. Kunzang Chodenji from Bhutan, and as well as Dr. Niaz Zamanji from Bangladesh for sparing your valuable time with us. I sincerely thank on behalf of Ma'am Ajit Kaur Ma'am, President Postwall, and as well as the Dr. K. Srinivasa Rauji, Secretary Sahitya Academy, for sparing your valuable time. And I sincerely thank all the viewers who are watching this session through virtual mode. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Jai.